Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we have something very different than our usual schlock weashling around here. Um, Normally, I do a lot of interviews with authors and we talk about things, all this type of thing. This time, we're going to have a very in-depth discussion on geopolitics. This person has not written a book, and that's fine because they are a real-life bona fide expert on all things to do with war and intel and geopolitics and all this type of thing. If you're on TikTok, you need to go follow that intel guy because he does great videos all the time debunking 98.8% of the myths that you find in the news media about everything. And we kind of bonded in the comments section over a video about World War III. And I'm kind of like, you know why World War III is not happening? Because nobody wants World War III to happen. It incentivizes no one. So, and we started talking back and forth, and I stitched one of his videos, and I messaged him and said, I do a podcast, let's do something long form that's longer than 10 minutes. And he very graciously has agreed to join us, if with a bit of trepidation. So welcome to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, so let's start from the beginning. For those that are not familiar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the wild world of intelligence?
Sure. So I spent 10 years in the intel community through the United States Marine Corps. I left the Marine Corps as a captain, but during that 10 years, I was in every intelligence billet that they want you to go through. And so I left as a 0202 MACTAF intelligence officer. But during that time, I spent the majority of that time supporting Special Operations Command and more specifically JSOC. And I also spent a tour at the NSA.
Very nice. That big black brick in Virginia.
I was in the basement of that. That's my office was right in the labyrinth of that building.
I always feel like the building brief for the NSA headquarters was cartoon villain. That's what we're looking for. Billions of dollars later. If you're the National Security Agency, maybe make it something more friendly. Maybe something Frank Lloyd Wright inspired. No, y'all went for cartoon villain.
Yes, that's true, right?
It is. Yes.
The original building still sits there, and it's connected to the big black building everyone's familiar with. And in fact, there's multiple buildings that people don't realize exist. What's called the campus that support various aspects of the agency. And then, fun fact about the NSA: the majority of the NSA's successes were done by women. They led the way through since World War II all the way up to now, doing a lot of the things that people don't know about.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. You find out, women have their hands in all sorts of odd things, like the social media thing with like Hedy Lamarr incidentally invented the technology that would one day become Wi-Fi because she was in World War II being like, yeah, I'm working on a movie, but I'm trying to get this radio to work better.
Right.
And, he's like, yeah, hand me the cold cream, but also a screwdriver. It's, just so insane. So I'm not surprised. And honestly, judging by how women use social media to find out stuff by men, if we literally just let the women of America run our intelligence, we would know everybody about every human being on this planet probably by the end of the week.
Yep.
We would, it would be a little extreme. So I'm not at all surprised. So, well, that's fun. The British have the same problem with MI6. The MI6 building brief was James Bond villain, and that's what they built it right off the tip. So it's very imposing.
Right.
But that's a lot of fun. So the first thing I want to talk about, besides the architecture of various and sundry intelligence agencies, is let's start with the topic that we'll say brought us together. Why don't we talk about World War III in our present conflict environment? To the average uninformed person, it seems like the world is blowing up. When I was in grad school, we talked about what conflict might cause a global conflict. And right now, 2 of them are occurring. And so if you talked to me in 2011, I'd be kind of like, yeah, buy a bunker, lay in some food. But times have changed a lot in the intervening 12 years since I left Norwich University in Vermont, and when I was studying these things, and it's a very different geopolitical environment. So why, given the Sitzkrieg that's happening in Ukraine and the current situation in Palestine and Israel, why are these conflicts not going to expand?
Yeah, when have they ever? I mean, it's which conflict do you want to talk about first?
Well, I mean,
Ukraine
Israel
or
Palestine is the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, we have an issue there at least once, a major issue there at least once a decade. You know,
right?
that's
Yeah.
yes. But I think now everyone's afraid, oh, Lebanon, oh, Hezbollah, oh, Iran, all this type of thing. And it's like Iran can't do anything. They're a barely functional country. What are they going to do? Complain. That's it.
Well, one of the biggest things that has affected the world in the last, probably since, well, really probably since the Trump election, but really before that was misinformation and the use of disinformation by way of social media, and so what you have there is you have all these like Iran or Iran, whatever, is a prime example. They pump out so much misinformation. They do all these propaganda videos. Some of it's CGI, some of it's really bad CGI, but regardless, even if they do a real staged event, the average person believes when they see like a military parade or a military exercise firing like 100,000 missiles, they freak out. They're like, "Oh my goodness." Okay, well then think about the details. Can they actually bring any of that to bear? Can any of that actually come out and be operational? There's so much ignorance out there with regards to military capability and the things behind the scenes that make effective military operations,
Well, and Iran
logistics,
also has a
supplies.
geography problem.
They
They're
have a huge.
surrounded on three sides by mountain ranges. It's one
Which
of
is
the reasons
great
they
for the
defense. They
it's
don't get invaded a
great
lot, but
for
it
the
also makes it hard to get out.
Right, exactly. There's like one
Yeah.
way in, one way out kind of thing. But
Mhm.
that's great for their defense. That's great for regime survivability.
Right.
But as far as offensive capabilities, yeah, they can't leave their country. And but people don't think about that. Everybody looks at these conflicts like it's a game of Risk on a game board. And it's just like no, that's literally the level of thinking all these people are applying. And the scary thing is that you have people that have spent years, decades, whole careers in this industry, and they think like that. And they get popular for making outlandish comments, and it scares everyone. So what you see is this world of fear built around a bunch of fiction that is being perpetuated by people that call themselves professionals, and that's the real problem.
Well, and then also, I mean, I understand, the rockets coming from Lebanon is certainly a problem. And, the IDF is a relatively small force they've called up everybody in the damn country that's only 350,000 people. If you get some sort of two-front thing happening, that is a problem. But the reality, Lebanon is a failed state, no military there. Syria is mired in a civil war a decade long going. So really your only worry coming out of Lebanon is rockets from Hezbollah, and that's not anything the IDF can't easily handle. And what they don't handle, the Iron Dome will do the rest of. So
Not to mention the
Iran's
lack.
not gonna be able to do a whole lot.
Right, exactly, and that's the point. Iran is not going to be able to do a whole lot. They may throw in some cyber, right? They may, but they're basically going to shake their verbal sabers, and they're going to supply these militias with their missile technology and missiles, and that's about it. That's all they can really do. Look at what happened to Lebanon the last time there was a Hezbollah Israeli war. Uh,
Major invasion is what happened.
yeah,
Didn't
yeah,
last
well,
long.
right.
Yeah.
Is Israel like? I mean, like, I forget the exact quote, but I think it was either Hezbollah's leader or the leader of Lebanon came out recently and said, if we get into another full-on war with Israel, they'll send us back to the equivalent of the Stone Age. They freely admitted it, and it's like, but does that get reported in the media? No.
No.
So that they're not going to do anything other than what they're doing now, because they're
Right.
afraid of the outcome, which is their destruction. So there won't be any
Yeah.
two front war.
No, I mean, I think there is I think the primary difficulty with the Israel Palestine, which really is Hamas conflict, is And I think the Biden administration was very wise to tell Netanyahu this. You have Western public opinion on your side, but only for so long. And a lot of the photos and videos coming out of that are going to sour Western public opinion real quick.
Right.
I think Israel's greatest problem isn't even on the ground. It's making it so that they don't have a problem in the countries that are backing them. Because the reality is, if the photos and videos get a whole lot worse, especially considering we're recording this on the 15th of November 2023, they're invading a major hospital today, and you get a lot of photos and videos out of that that start to break out in Western social media, that's going to very much sour public opinion, particularly public opinion under 40, which is not nearly as on the side of Israel as 40 plus. Um, so to me, in my mind, managing the public relations war is as important as gassing out the tunnels that Hamas has
Right.
built. You know,
And you actually see that there's a whole bunch of, and this goes back to the information war that I referenced earlier. Whoever controls information controls the war, kind of thing. And so they're trying to get ahead of that as they're invading or laying siege to the hospital, describing what they found, describing the fact that they're taking extra care when going from room to room. They didn't level the hospital like I'm sure Hamas wish they did. You're not getting any of that. They're handling it as kid glove as you possibly can, understanding the threat and understanding the goal, which is or the mission really, which is there's no way Hamas can survive in this environment. This terrorist enclave must cease to exist. That's the mission, and so they're going to do everything they can to make sure they're successful. And controlling the information is definitely paramount to that.
yeah, I think there's also an opportunity using old-fashioned counterinsurgency doctrine to use the humanitarian shipments to starve Hamas out. And that's why I think having the civilians grouping together in the South and having the humanitarian thing be down there basically means if you're going to stay in the North and fight, you've got to survive on the supplies that you have, and you can effectively keep supplies from moving ever farther northward. It's old-fashioned, it's brutal, um worked in North Vietnam till about 1964 when we quit doing it. It's not fun, it's not pretty. It's not pretty, but
Right.
it is the if you're wanting to suss out who the terrorists are, same thing with the Malay emergency in 1963 in Malaysia. If you want to suss out the bad guys, that's honestly the fastest way to do it, is make everybody leave and then stand outside and sell pancakes and lemonade. You'll quickly soon find out who the troublemakers are.
Right.
I think that's a wise decision, but it is a very difficult it is a very difficult thing. And I think trying to end Hamas once and for all, I don't know, what do you feel like your over under is on whether they'll do that or not?
I honestly haven't put a whole lot of thought to it because these groups tend to just outlast. They just tend to survive. I mean, ISIS is still around. They may
Yeah.
not have a caliphate, but they still exist. It's just Hamas is still going to exist. What Gaza City is going to look like, or what northern Gaza is going to look like here in the next few months is anybody's guess. Again, it depends on a lot of things, to include what you were talking about with the narrative and supportability. But at the end of the day, Israel's going to do what Israel's going to do. But I don't know what the outcome is for Hamas. I just don't. I'm not going to say they're going to be wiped out because I
No,
just don't think that's going to be the case.
no, and I'm glad you said that because I don't have any portents that that mission is going to be successful. Will you probably break the spine of Hamas? Yeah. Will you drive them way underground for possibly a very long time? Absolutely. Are you going to, in a short period of time, get rid of one of the premier terrorist organizations on the planet? I doubt it. Um, that's just not possible. It's I think they're going. There's plenty of routes. If you're Hamas, there's plenty of routes out of that area,
Right.
by land, sea, and air if necessary. And their main leadership is even in Gaza. They're in
Right.
Qatar. Um,
Right.
so unless you're planning on bombing that hotel, that's at least the main leadership is going to be around in comfortable air conditioning. So I think this will definitely It will buy them time, it will buy them years, but it's not going to be the end of Hamas. And I would caution anyone in the Israeli government from coming out and declaring Hamas dead.
Right. Yeah, I don't even think they will. I think they'll maybe declare the area secure or free of Hamas, but they're not going to say Hamas has been killed off or whatever. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and speaking of PR, and if I were them, I would keep my words about that measured,
Right.
sort of thing.
Yep.
Yes. Well, with that one, we've kind of talked that one to death. Let's move on to Ukraine. Um, what a mess. It's been almost 2 years. Um, this conflict is close to my heart. I have a dear friend who lives in Moscow that I have not spoken to since the Sunday after the invasion.
Oh, that's terrible.
Um, yeah, we only ever were able to communicate over Facebook, and Facebook has been banned in Russia for almost 2 years. Um, she has my address and my phone number, but I don't think it's safe to contact people in the West right now for obvious reasons.
Right.
So it's I wrote a Sunday Dispatch at the time that said, I am talking to a friend about a war. We don't know when we're going to talk again. Is it 1943? I don't have clothes for this. Like I need a zoot suit and a cool car and a fedora. I did not dress for World War II. But it was a very difficult sort of thing. And today, November 15th, we learned that Ukraine has made it across the Dnipro River, and they've got managed to get over the river. They're making some headway there. There's a lot of mines, but they're going ahead. That's the most progress they've made in months.
Right.
What is your view of this conflict? I think it has gotten stuck, and I think Zelensky needs to call Moscow for terms. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what needs to happen, and nobody can accept the fact that that Putin can dictate a change to the world order or to the international boundaries or whatever. And so that's why there is no phone call. Um, before I get into that specific thought about like the end, I kind of want to roll back though to like the beginning of what we asked about World War III and what it takes, right? So what it takes for World War III, in my opinion, is that a nuclear power that has at least regional hegemony, like Russia does, or China for that matter, and enough nukes for that matter. If they have one or two, it's just not the same. They have to
Right.
have enough to basically burn the world, or at least a significant portion of it. And that they are in direct conflict with another nation that is at least a regional hegemony with nuclear capabilities, and we're nowhere near that. And that path, and there's no path. I just going back to the Middle East real quick. There's no
Yeah.
path from the Middle East to that. People tie, well, Russia must get involved if Iran is invaded, and I'm like, and every time I hear that, I'm like, says who? Like like Putin could
Not with
care
the
less. I
entire
mean,
military bogged down in Ukraine. Putin's not touching
right.
that with a 10-foot pole.
Exactly, because the moment he opens up that door, it opens up the door for NATO to go into Ukraine. I mean, and then of course, then
Yes.
you do have your World War III. But the point is that Putin doesn't want World War III, and that's what people can't wrap their heads around.
No,
Is
he would like
that
to annex Ukraine. That's what
right?
he's after. This is not
Exactly.
1941. This is 1935, folks, and we're annexing Austria. Like that's, to draw
Right,
from
but
history.
he also doesn't have this global domination kind of Hitler-esque mustache man type of mentality either. He recognizes the limitation. He laments. Don't get me wrong. He laments of a lost empire, of course, and he's going to use that to rally his countrymen. But he also understands the reality that he faces, which is there's only a few countries out there that he can actually invade that aren't going to lead to World War III. And so those are going to be the countries he's going to go after. So, if he was successful through Ukraine, he would have moved on to Moldova through Transnistria. But I mean, like, that still might be the goal. But he's going to keep it in countries that don't have anything to do with NATO and or not officially a part.
And
And
even
he's
that has
proved,
backfired. Public opinion in Sweden was firmly against joining NATO and had been for decades.
right.
He flipped that in 6 months.
Right.
They had a
Exactly.
national referendum, and Sweden's kind of like, NATO, old friend, we've been meaning to join. Our got lost in the mail, but here we are. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. His whole
and the
calculus
Swedish military is
was wrong.
actually kind of badass. Like, you don't want to screw with Sweden. They have
Right.
planes. They have they're a functional country, sort of thing. And now, and he talks about, oh, you don't want to. I don't want a border with. It's like you have a border from Finland through the Baltics down to Ukraine. You've made the problem worse, not better,
Worse.
Mr.
Yeah.
Putin. You're this marginal returns on this one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know.
And he never went. There's so many woulda, coulda, shouldas. Like he should have, taken a case to the UN. He should have, taken a case directly to Ukraine government about, maybe even buying the land. As far as because his argument of Russian ethnic speaking Ukrainians who think they're Russian or whatever. That's why we need to take these, the Donbass and whatnot. He didn't do any of that. Like, right. He just kept marshaling forces and invading territory. So his argument truly isn't even about the people. It's about access to the Black Sea. It's about Crimea. And he saw that he was about to lose that naval base, or that it was under threat, right? Because they had like a contractual agreement to lease it from Ukraine for like, I don't know if it was akin to like a Hong Kong agreement or whatever, but for a long period of time. But once he saw he lost the government, he soon thought, okay, well, I'm going to lose Crimea as well. So, of course he's going to invade.
Well,
Did
and
we push
that's
him to do it?
that's something, politically speaking, I've long complained. The original sin of letting him annex Crimea is kind of what has brought this about. And I say that as a blue state living overeducated East Coast elite. That yes, it was the Democrat Party that sold Crimea out and indirectly led to the Ukraine, and I'm not afraid to say that. Like, and yes, a Republican administration probably would have said, hell no. George Bush would have just kind of laughed and been like, no, we're not letting you annex anything. Goodbye. Like, and all this, I mean, like that would not have been a conversation. And so yes, and that was, in some way we have some culpability by letting that sort of thing happen. But yes, to your point though about losing the government, he was happy as long as Ukraine could be a buffer and he controlled the government in Kyiv.
Right.
The minute that happened, that changed, and that was not the case, Ukraine became a problem. And especially given that not only did he not control the government in Kyiv, but Kyiv was eager to become closer with the West.
Right.
We have to remember this all started because Ukraine was starting the process to join the European Union. And that, which I think in Russia's mind meant if they get EU membership, NATO membership will not be far behind. They're not wrong, because Ukraine is bordered on two sides by EU member states that are also part of NATO. And for people who don't understand, those are two separate treaty organizations. There are people who are members of the EU that aren't members of NATO. There are members of NATO that are not members of the EU, like Turkey. It's a separate
And
treaty
one's
organization.
military
Yes.
defense based, and the other is economic based. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Different treaty. People get those conflated, and it's important to. Those are very separate institutions with separate things going on. But I think in Ukraine's case, Putin's logic was not far off. One would lead to the other, and that's what set this whole problem in motion. And I don't know if you laugh about this, but I laughed at this. I said growing up in the 90s and 2000s, there was always this great fear, what if the Russian tanks roll across Ukraine? What are we going to do? And there were major, I mean, the Abrams was built for that eventuality, in the event that we have made major policy hardware decisions in this country in the event that ever happens. As it turns out, we needn't have worried because they don't know how to get gas to the tanks at the front. Like, we needn't have spent all that money because we just could wait for them to not be able to have fuel, and their invasion doesn't get very far. I did kind of laugh.
Yeah, and that's to my earlier point about successful offensive military operations I made about Iran was to say it applies to Russia as well. Obviously, right? Because everybody watched it
Yes,
unfold. That if you
right.
don't, you you know having firepower is great, but if you have no idea how to get it there, if you have no idea how to sustain it, if you have no idea how to replace it once it's gone, like you're not going to do anything beyond too much beyond your borders, right? And so Russia has proven that they can't do much past their borders. And so that's why I view them as a regional hegemonic threat. The only reason why they would be a global hegemonic threat would be strict nuclear, but um,
A
that's
lot.
also never
My thing with the nuclear weapons, and I'll say this over and over again, and people forget this: the ICBMs are all ancient, aging Soviet hardware. My
right.
guess is you push the button, half of them don't even get the code.
Right. Well,
Another third of them blow up in the silo, rendering those whole areas radiative. A
would that be
few
so?
might actually pop out and be a problem. Like, I mean, it's not. This is not 1963. You
Right,
know.
and people don't didn't even know this happened, but when the Iron Curtain fell, we were finally got a look behind the scenes, and all of our assessments were wrong. Right, we did this whole
Yes.
um, oh, I forgot the term. It was like we basically applied our own capabilities and limitations onto their like in an assumption kind of framework. And
Right.
so because we maintained 80 to 90% efficiency in our equipment, we assumed they did the same. But it turns out that like half their stuff worked, right? And it was
Yeah.
and so even though we knew this, we still they still had this mythos about them of being the angry Russian bear and don't poke the bear, and like, oh, it's Russia. Like we still had this like kind of scary feeling notion about them all the way up until now, all the way up until
Yes.
the invasion of Ukraine. And then for all the world to see, it turns out that we were all our analysis was wrong again, even though we knew the truth. And so we thought that when they went through their modernization program in the last 20 years, that was real. Again, there was no like on the ground assessments. Um,
It was real for the
that,
oligarchs to grift. The
yeah,
oligarchs got
exactly.
very wealthy. The
But
military
we
got
knew
no
they
help,
were
but the
doing
oligarchs
this.
did very well.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. We knew we were doing this, and we still applied this fanciful tale that they were going to steamroll Ukraine in 3 days and be a direct threat to Poland. And it's just like,
No, I mean it. I mean, I have to say, I mean, if you had talked to me, the weekend I graduated in June of 2011 on the green at Norwich University, and I would have that was my number one. I said, yeah, if Russia ever rolls the tanks across Ukraine, we're kind of sort of screwed, and we all should probably buy bunkers and iodine pills because things are going to get weird. And I remember seeing the video of that column stuck on the road, going nowhere fast, and just being like, well, that just threw 30 years of Pentagon planning out the window. Like, you know, I mean, wow, is this yeah, not quite the fear that we thought we should have had. And so, um, from a defense spending perspective, we could use that money back. But it's,
right.
yeah, it's a very, kind of, I mean, I think everyone was a bit surprised um at how kind of faltering that they have been. And even though that they've now quote unquote fixed most of the problems, they're still, I mean, I think the farthest they've gotten is 110 kilometers into Ukraine at their most successful.
Right.
And they pretty much don't control any land they're not standing on.
Yeah.
And this has cost them tens of thousands of troops, innumerable amounts of equipment. I mean, just, absolutely, the cost for what has been
Right.
steep.
Yeah.
Um,
And unfortunately, though, it did start that polar shift, right? That the realignment of nations, highlighting a multipolar world with China stepping in and kind of leading the way, and Russia, as their right hand person or lackey or whatever that used to be top dog. Because a lot of people in the West will no longer. I can't foresee, anyways, the West doing too much business with Russia ever again. At least not in the next. At least not in this generation.
Yeah.
Things may change in the future, and much like we do with Vietnam, 30 years later, Vietnam loves America because we go because they love our tourism. But
Also, great textile manufacturing. I used to work
yeah,
in fashion. A lot of textile manufacturing is in Southeast Asia, not China. A lot of it's in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So and they make great clothes. One of
right,
my best textile manufacturers is in Ho Chi Minh City. They're lovely. They're
yeah,
really
oh
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so who knows what Russia 20, 30 years is going to look like from now. I but they are going. I don't want to say they're going to. And like what characterizes winning, right? I was going to say they're going to win, but they're going to keep what they have. Like is basically, if you want to characterize that as a win, fine. But there's no reason for them to give it up. Our approach to this was too conservative. I think if it was a Trump administration, he would have probably given them tanks and airplanes a year ago. He would have tripled or quadrupled that order. He would have been like, yeah, take it all. It's, see what you can do with it.
Yeah.
Um, you could
Well,
of course you could roll that.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of equipment that got stuck in Poland and elsewhere that was kind of quietly given away without the express written approval of the White House. I saw a story about how Poland had these MiG 29s that, by some accident, no one knows how, got disassembled and left in a forest conveniently near the Ukrainian border for easy collection and reassembly at a nearby airbase. Like, the Poles just can't keep track of stuff.
Right.
And the Poles did that because the White House was waffling on it. So they just
Right.
kind of, did that and been like, yeah, you should go collect some parts over there where we left
Yeah.
them last night, sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I agree with you. Any of the last two Republican administrations would have been like, yeah, send everything. And, if it fires as an engine fly, just give it to them, and it would have
Right.
been much more overt.
Yeah, and honestly, that's
Certainly.
kind of for me, that's the scary part with regards to the who is advising the Biden administration, because it's almost like they don't realize what they're doing. The conservative approach is too it's just too conservative. It's to the point where you end up losing, right? Or at least what people might characterize it as losing, because in my opinion, Ukraine has basically 2024, and they're kind of toast.
Yeah.
Unless we change something with regards to how we're supporting them, because like right now we've given them what, a squadron of I mean, I don't know what we've given them exactly with regards to F-16s,
They're
but like
training on F-16s in Arizona.
yeah,
They're not even going to go
all of
online
that should have
until the
started
spring.
way earlier. All of
Yeah.
that should have started way earlier, and it didn't. And so now, what are they running up against? A house and a divided America that is very much like, I don't want to fund them anymore. And so like, what's going to happen if they don't get any more funding, they don't get any more equipment, they have what they have, and then they roll into 2024, and Russia successfully stops them in the next spring offensive, and then just solidifies their defensive positions and says, "What do you got now?" Because Russia has the
Yeah.
time, they have the time, the people, and the money, because they're running a deficit that just does not compare to ours. Like
Ask
it's so much more.
Chechnya. Putin waited the Chechens out. Don't hear about them much anymore because Putin
Right.
waited them out
Yeah.
literally, and just made it so that it got so miserable to be in Chechnya. Half the people left, and whoever there was left eventually gave up, and that was the end of the whole Chechnya thing. And
Right.
I've said 6 months ago, this war continues at the pleasure of Washington and Berlin, and the minute the West is done funding it, this war will be over
Yep.
because Ukraine won't last 6 months after that. And my
Right.
guess is the Biden administration is going to tell Zelensky, you need to call Moscow and get terms, because
Right.
there's no will for us to pay for this anymore. It's costing hundreds of billions of dollars. It's running into money. There's not a lot of will to keep spending on for a war that's not really moving. Nothing much is happening. And I don't know. What do you think the fallout of that is going to be, where Putin kind of gets his way? Maybe he
I
gets the
can't really.
Donbass, and that's it.
Yeah. I don't know how that's going to look on the international stage. They're I, I personally can't envision how we're going to treat that, right? Like, are we going to just not recognize the fact that that part is now a part of Russia? Is Russia going to say that, yeah, it's a special zone that's independent but ours? Like, I don't know how it's going to be framed or how we're all going to accept it. Um, it's almost like there's realities competing with each other. You know, there's the Russian reality of the world, and then there's the West reality of the world, and
Well,
like,
look what Russia did in South Ossetia and Georgia. They literally just rolled in with some troops and some barbed wire and was like, yeah, this is part of Russia again. And literally no one ever talks about that. They
right,
annexed half of Georgia, not the state, the country. And didn't nobody really has said anything about it. And it continues up. It's not on maps. If you look at a map, the old border is still there. But the reality on the ground is that Russia has been controlling half of that country for 20 years at this point.
right. And I
You
think they're not going to be done with Ukraine, even if there's like a peace deal. You're just going to see the one thing Russians do is they in peacetime they send their people in. They do destabilizing operations.
Oh, yes.
Through cultural and political means, and it can take years to reach a boiling point or fruition or whatever. But and so I feel like they're just going to do the same thing to Ukraine. And before you know it, and I say before you know it, but like in 5 years or whatever the time frame is, but in our lifetime, Ukraine will be another satellite of that whole territory will be another satellite of Russia. It'll just take some time.
Yes. And which is what, I doubt Putin will live to see that reality because he is dying.
True.
Reports say that he has major health issues. He looks like someone who has major health issues right now. Um, I've heard Parkinson's, I've heard cancer, all this type of thing. But he's gonna whoever will follow him, and we don't know who that person will be, but whoever will follow him will be in a position to make that a reality. And the reality is the Russian civilization is very old. They've been here a long time. They're a
Right.
patient bunch. I think winter does that to you.
Yep.
Those long winters give you a lot of patience, and they're willing to wait. And they also know that the West does not have that kind of patience.
Yeah.
Incidentally, Xi Jinping follows the same logic. Um, One can wait around. Eventually, the West will move on or whatever have you, and then you can do what you like.
Yeah. Well, Xi Jinping also has that problem though, with regards to age, and how much he's going to
Yes.
see done before he meets his maker. I mean, it's truly up to him on what happens with Taiwan. It would be interesting to see what his predecessor, if we ever get that far, does. Uh, takes that in direction. But everything with regards to China and Taiwan is all in the mind of one man, and nobody can predict what's going to happen with
Yeah.
regards to with that part of the world.
No, I mean that's the thing with China over Taiwan. It's gotten Xi Jinping has consolidated almost all power of the CCP around himself personally.
Mm,
Um, and he's gotten himself basically appointed chairman for life, and with
right.
the title of great leader, who's the only person who's ever had that is Mao. um and also I think in my mind most fascinating is um at the last Communist Party conference last year, in the closing ceremony in front of the entire party, he had Hu Jintao removed from the room.
Right.
Now, people don't understand Chinese party politics. That's a flex. That's a big flex. And that was him. That was, I think, the crown jewel of him cementing power within the CCP. I worry two things. I worry one, he doesn't understand what's going on and will do something stupid that he won't know is stupid because he doesn't know what the hell is going on. And
Right.
two, I worry about the chaos if he should suddenly die. And he's 80 now.
Yeah.
So that's on the table. One bad bowl of lo mein and it's all over.
Right. And so that's what that was kind of to my point is that just that nobody knows. Now, what's interesting though is that in the last few days they've sent plenty of signals saying that they don't want to do anything. They agree with this strategic ambiguity because it still recognizes a one China policy. And oh, by the way, America, we recognize we need you. Um, the vice president of China came out like a week ago or whatever and said that they want to mend ties, economic ties with America. I mean, or mend ties, and I that implies economic ties because they see the writing on the wall, which is that we're divesting from them economically, and they're like, "Ooh, we kind of need American money," and it's just like, yeah, no kidding. And
No,
which
I did
leads
a video
into
where I said China just found out you can't screw with the world's largest, most powerful economy and get away with it. I mean, I could have
right,
told them that, but they found out the hard way. And so all of a sudden, it's kind of, all of a sudden they're placing orders for soybeans, which all my soybean farmer friends are very happy because they spent a long time building those markets. But it's like all of a sudden it's kind of like, yeah, soybeans, send them on over. All this,
yep,
yeah, it's, and especially with all the manufacturing leaving, youth unemployment in China is out of control. And
right,
the CCP also understands the fundamental social contract that keeps them in power. They stay in power as long as China's economy is strong and people have jobs. The minute
yep,
people in China don't have jobs and the economy falters, that's them out of power.
right,
And they've known that since 1989. I mean, they've known
right.
that since Mao died. That's not news. And so yes, they, and especially, and people don't realize exports between China and the United States are down like 60%.
Right.
It's it's a major change from the last several, since 2000 when they joined the WTO. That's for them, especially for an export-based economy, that's huge. And it's very hard to make that transition from an export-based economy to domestic consumer. Ask Japan. It was
Oh
a
yeah,
very rough transition for Japan moving out of the export economy.
right.
Um, and China is not there yet. They have fallen into the trap we always thought they would. They will grow old before they grow rich. Um, and yes, it's yes, if I were them, I too, as Mr. Jinping is presently doing, get on a plane and head over to San Francisco and try to go make nice with the United States. That seems like
Exactly.
a good plan for me. you know
Right.
um yes, and that is but I also think that rather precludes an invasion of Taiwan, because if they are desirous of American money and American trade, that becomes a quiet insurance policy against an invasion of Taiwan,
Yep.
minus the fact China's own military issues. Because
Right.
my first thing was, okay, you want to invade Taiwan, that's nice, how are your troops going to get there?
Exactly.
Are they going to swim? like,
Right.
like I have questions. Most of your ships are diesel powered and they have a range of 1,500 kilometers, if that. They can't even reach Hawaii. The Japanese in World War II got farther than you folks can today.
Right.
Like, so how is this going to work? I don't understand.
And that's
Um,
what people don't understand about China, though, is that they're not they're growing slowly, right? A lot of their navy is built around the idea of protecting their one China policy, not about global outreach and superpower.
yeah.
That's secondary, right? So they're growing relationships with other nations where they can port their ships in peaceful operations and conduct piracy operations and protect the sea lanes, much like we do. That's their goal, but they don't have. But beyond that, their only goal for their primary goal for the Navy is to invade Taiwan, but they're not there yet, right? Because they don't have the amphibious capabilities. They don't have the troop transport capabilities. Right now their answer is, well, we'll just use our civilian ships. I'm like, oh yeah, your civilian captains with their civilian made vessels are going to go into war, go into contested waters where half the ships are sunk from various methods from other nations to include Taiwan. I mean, it's just like it's not going to end well for anyone. It's going to become the straits will become a graveyard. And you think your men are robots? They're just going to be like, yeah, full steam ahead. No way.
Yeah, no, they're
No
going to
way.
love sitting on some Chinese-built cruise ship getting missile fire from the Taiwanese Defense Force. That's going to work out. Like,
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah.
yes, no,
So,
and
I mean,
that's yeah, there's a lot of logistical capabilities with all of that, you
right,
know.
exactly. And people don't realize that. And it goes back to kind of really where we started with the, information warfare and the ignorance of the average citizen just doesn't understand the capabilities. It looks great on TV, but it's not reality. And yet they run with it. And then fear runs wild, and then you get all these. And now we're back to, oh, it's World War III every day. And it's like, no, we're nowhere near
No.
World War III, people. What are you talking about?
Minus the fact it's not in anybody's interest. Putin doesn't, if Putin wanted to buy the farm, he would have at least tried to buy the farm. Again, those ICBMs are ancient.
Yeah,
He would have at least tried to buy the farm by now. He could have at
right,
least gotten everyone's attention by sending tactical nukes and given them command to commanders in the field. When our
right,
India and Pakistan get mad at each other, that's what they do. Russia could have done the same thing. And yes, if Putin had done that, that would have gotten everyone's attention.
right.
From Poland to Washington, we all would have been like, you've done what now? All right,
Yeah,
you've got our attention. Like,
yeah.
it's, sort of thing. And he hasn't done that. He hasn't
Yep.
taken that step, which tells me that he does not want this to become, he does not want to give an excuse for the United States to say, well, the B-52s just left Louisiana. They'll be there in several hours. And well, you won't be there in several hours by the time they're done. And, that's, he wants to, because he knows that's game over,
Right.
that's,
Yeah, and
and
he wants to live. These evil
yes,
dictators that want to burn the world to the ground kind of want to live. It's just like these two things can't live next to each other, and yet that's people think that these evil dictators just want to see the world burn. I'm like, well, then why hasn't it burned yet? They
yeah,
probably because it's not true. And then another thing that people don't understand is like with Russian military doctrine, it says very specifically how they're going to use their nukes, and surprisingly, he's stuck with that. But you could always go away from your doctrine and use them offensively. But like the purpose of nukes in Russia's mind or in Putin's mind is for survivability anyways. So the rule of thumb is don't invade the nuclear power, right? I mean,
right.
because then they're going to lob their nukes at you. If you mess with their borders, with the survivability of their nation, then yes, that's when nukes are on the table. But they're not going to use them for offensive reasons, for like to go invade countries. It literally defeats the purpose. So yeah,
No, and that's why, again, it's even, even people can't even predict the saber rattling properly. Now, I do love Putin walking around with his nuclear suitcase. That's kind of cool. I'll give him that. That's cute. That's
yeah,
nice. That's
yeah.
that's all right. Like, sure. That's fine. But so far, that's about as, as far as it goes.
Well, and he likes to tout the Kinzhal missile from now and again, right? Like when he was like, "I'm going
Yes.
to have MiGs patrol the Red Sea with their Kinzhal missiles that can reach out and touch those carriers." And when I laughed. Everybody else was freaking out. But yeah, he does tend to do that too, and he knows those people are going to freak out. He knows it goes back to the ignorance and the information warfare and everything. It's like he's going to say these strategically threatening things because he knows the average person thinks it's real, or thinks that like, oh, that means he's one step closer to launching a nuke. And it's just like, no, he
No,
just
because
wants.
he can send his planes, and some nice man with a cigar and a fancy hat in an Ohio class submarine is going to be looking through a scope at those very airplanes. And that's going to be my dad's ex-Navy. That's going to be the end of that conversation.
Yep.
Like, there's a long black tube somewhere in the Red Sea they've got that situation handled.
Yep.
All is well.
Yeah,
It's
that's why I called the Ohio class of the world enders. So they hold like 300. They can, anyways, hold up to like 300 nuclear war. I keep saying nuclear warheads, and it's like, well, that can like devastate like a quarter of the globe. At least 300 cities, and it's just and they
yeah,
can
and
and they can
that's
launch
just
from anywhere.
one.
And they can launch from anywhere and strike globally, right? And we have like 14 of these. I don't know the exact number, but we have enough to burn the world like 10 times over. So
Yes, no, and that is and that is, especially when, you look at the capabilities of a lot of this stuff and, understand that. I mean, that's a very different, that's a very different conversation. I mean, that's why I think with the Australian, French, American submarine scandal of several years ago, where the Aussies decided to buy themselves some nice shiny nuclear submarines and tell the French to go, take their submarines elsewhere, was so significant, because having nuclear powered submarines with some of that capability so very close to China, based so very close, and the ability to get there so much faster. I think that gave Beijing some pause. Like, that's, the French diesel powered subs. Well, that's not so bad. That's comparable to Chinese technology. But getting, last gen American stuff, that's a very different conversation for power balance in Asia Pacific. Because that also builds up Australia's capability to maintain those boats, to maintenance those boats, to refuel them, all this type of thing. That's a very different. It basically makes Australia a pseudo nuclear power, nuclear adjacent power, if you will. And all of a sudden, it's you don't have to wait for those missiles to fly for a half hour from the U.S. All of a sudden, they'll be here momentarily, from some nice kind submarine, off the coast of Papua New Guinea or something. That's a very different conversation. And again, the corollary of all of this is everything we've said. This is why World War III probably isn't happening, for all the reasons listed above. But I do think, though, we are entering into a time where we're going to have lots of different sort of conflicts going on around the planet. I think this is the new normal, and people need to kind of get used to it. The age of peace and stability is over.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I characterize it as a new Cold War 2.0. I mean, because when you look at back at the Cold War, it was always, tensions were always high for nuclear war then, right? I mean, kids were always taught to hide under the desk in case of,
that was my mother's generation. Duck and cover. Yes.
And then on top of that, there was at least a dozen proxy wars or coups or whatever that were going on throughout the decades. Now that's just ramped up. Now, instead of just the USSR and America, it's the West versus the East, right? It's China, Russia, and all their allies. Everybody's like, "Oh, BRICS." I'm like, "Yeah, BRICS or whatever." But
I'm like, these people can't agree on it. No, everyone's like, "Oh, the BRICS are taking over." I'm like, with what currency? Please find me a bank that will take payment in Brazilian reals. Please find me. That's not Brazilian. Please find me one that will take international trade in a currency whose stability is questionable at any given moment. It's like, the yuan's going to take over. Nobody wants China's currency. You know what China does with the yuan? They buy treasury bills to convert it into dollars, a currency people actually want to do business in. Like, that's what the yuan is good for. It'll get you a coffee in Shanghai, but it's not going to buy you soybeans in Iowa. That's what it's not going to do.
Exactly. And what's even funnier is people comparing BRICS to NATO, and I'm just like, okay, you guys go back to geopolitics 101, please.
There's nobody in that has. I mean, there's nobody in the BRICS outside of Russia, sort of, that has a functional military, and nothing with power projection, because clearly Russia can't do that anymore. So, there's no. I mean, no. I mean, even among NATO, which is mostly the United States, the French still actually can do stuff. Like, they actually do things. The British can be reasonably called upon to do something from time to time. We could cobble something together with everybody, sort of thing. The BRICS don't have anything like that. Besides China, is there even a single aircraft carrier amongst them? I don't think so. Works. Yeah, and China's one doesn't work. I was gonna say, it's like,
Russia's doesn't work. China has two. One's a training thing, and the training one only, and then the third one is their first indigenous one. It's still in development, or it's going through sea trials. Their plan is to only have four by 2030, and the whole purpose is just to control their regional sectors along their coast. Again, going back to their one China policy, that's all they're going to use them for, and people just don't understand that. And then all that, they're tiny in comparison to ours. One of our aircraft carriers is like a third the size or third larger, and can has deployed twice as much aircraft and weaponry than one of theirs. So it's not even there's not even a competition there.
No, and then people don't, understand there's also not only is that, but you also have to have all the stuff to support a ship like that. And the support facilities are tremendous. I used to live in Seattle. There was an old carrier base in Bremerton where they have ships in mothball now, which is really, you drive up 16 and there's just aircraft carrier, aircraft carrier, aircraft. It's very impressive, sort of thing. But I mean, that was that whole town. That was their job. That's where my dad decided to go into the Navy. He was standing there and looked down at the ships and said, "Yeah, that's for me," in about 1983, and off he went. Um, and I mean the support of that is absolutely tremendous, both in expense and people and logistics and having it fed and fueled and all that type of thing. I mean, it's a whole thing, and I think that's also where people kind of lose the plot with a lot of this stuff is like, yeah, you could send some troops, but what are they going to eat? And where's the gas going to come from? You know,
Exactly.
and when you don't have that, and I mean, there's a reason why the Pentagon's like the world's best logistics organization, because the logistics of being able to put troops anywhere on the planet means you have to get them food, transportation, medevac, all these types of things, and the equipment, manpower, diplomatic relationships, airbase, all this type of thing that's required to make that possible is just, that is one of the ways in which we are still a unique power.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
as compared to even our near peers. And China's not even close. And I also, when people laugh about BRICS, I also laugh about Belt and Road, because that was a big thing in political science circles for a while, was,
Right.
oh, the Belt and Road Initiative. And I'm kind of like, have you tried doing business in Kazakhstan? That's If China can figure out how to bring Tajikistan to heel, they deserve it.
Right.
If they can
Yeah.
get them on board, they deserve to have it. And Belt and Road never really went anywhere. And incidentally, they don't talk about it much anymore because it never really went anywhere.
Well, it goes right back to the real estate problem, right? This whole concept of build it and they will come kind of thing just doesn't work for them. I mean, it props up their
No.
economy for a while, but then they faced with no return on the end, and then a bunch of debt. And it's just that's what
Yes.
and so it's a very similar concept. They propped up 30% of their economy through their real estate, and then now they're
Yes.
just empty bricks of sitting on plots of land. It's the same thing with the Belt and Road. It may be a little different with the debt traps, but like still at the end of the day, there's tons of logistics lanes that were built and nobody uses them, and it's just like, well, then then that was a
No, no,
waste.
I do think though. Now, here's what I think could be interesting. If China can pivot some of that infrastructure to link up with Russia's raw natural resources,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a partnership made in heaven. Because I mean, people
Which
forget
is
this. China has no natural resources in its
right,
mainland, not very much. It has some in the mountains in interior China. They have no oil. Their agricultural land is awful and has always been that way. Agricultural
right.
land in China has always been poor. Um, if they could use that infrastructure and link up with Russia's natural resources, now that could be good for those two. That could be something, but that's 20 years out. If they started
Exactly.
today, that's a
And well,
2040s problem
and
at the
they have
earliest.
started, they have started, but to your point, it is a 2040s problem, because I mean, like they are building still. It's probably one of their projects that's behind, which is a rare thing. Is their nuclear powered icebreakers?
Yes.
Why do they need icebreakers? Because they're going to the Arctic, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
they have naval patrols and joint patrols with the Russians to the Arctic. Why? Because and Russia is redeveloping or adding to one of their old Arctic bases for this very purpose. And so that is definitely in the cards, in the plans. But again, to your point, it's decades out. But that is probably what they're going to do is plug into. That's why they're partnering up in the first place. Is that China needs their resources.
Yes, I think that if they get it together, that
Right.
has the potential with China's manufacturing capacity and Russia's raw natural resources. Now there you've got something. You really
Yeah.
do. There you've got something. I don't know what you've got, but you've got something.
Right.
But that's something that could be quite valuable down the road. Um, but you're still going to be a long ways away from being able to do what you can do in North America, because we can do all the stuff they want to do. We can do on this continent. The pipelines already exist,
Oh yeah.
and the distances are way shorter.
Yep. Yep.
So, to some degree, North America is still the continent and the country to beat. So,
And we will be for going into 2100 when both you and I are gone. It'll still
oh
be the same
yes,
conversation. They will have provided a truly multipolar world, an alternative, if you will, to Western hegemony. But does that lead to disaster in World War III? I honestly doubt it, because again, it's in nobody's best interest. The rich want to stay rich and they want to stay alive, and they're also in control of both our governments. So it's
yeah.
yeah, it's a lose-lose when we go into World War III, and they know that.
No, people forget there was a lot of incentives for World War One, especially territorial claims. There
Exactly.
was a lot of incentives for World War Two, particularly on the German side, mostly to do with territorial claims as well. There was very specific incentives. There was very specific reasons why those conflicts happened and occurred the way that they did. We just don't have those situations right now, and the
Right.
politics are very different. The colonial empires are gone. The territory situations is very different. um Coming out of the Cold War, we're still in this kind of awkward realignment phase, which I think we'll be in for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it's a very different scenario. It's a very different situation. So
Absolutely, I agree.
it's well, we've gone over the hour. Why don't you tell people where they can find you on TikTok, and we'll get you out of here.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I haven't had this type of long form discussion in a while, so it's very refreshing. So I appreciate that.
Of course, you're very
People
welcome.
can find me on TikTok and YouTube at the Intel Guy. Um, I'm trying to grow the YouTube channel more so, especially considering TikTok likes to sometimes pull the account if enough people complain. So YouTube is definitely where I'm going to try and navigate to. I also enjoy these longer form discussions, and that's what I'm trying to create. So, but yeah, find me there. And
Yeah,
if I could say one more thing,
of
if anybody that
course.
sees this, I help out a lot of people. I talk to a ton of people through my DMs and through the comments, and I engage with everyone. So so feel free to reach out to me, and I will do my best to answer your questions and calm your nerves.
No, no, thank you. I very much appreciate that. And yeah, when you're ready to do something interesting on YouTube, let me know, and I'll hurry on over there, and we'll have another conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Glad to have you. It would be glad to have you.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.